Hello everyone in the digital world, welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. I hope you all had a really nice Easter. Hope you enjoyed every one of those 4 days off. If you celebrate it, if you eat the chocolate, if you go to the church, if you just go and watch movies, if you went and saw Godzilla and Kong 400 times, whatever you did, I hope it was good. I'm appreciative of everybody who enjoyed my review of Godzilla and Kong. There's been some positive feedback about that, so that's pretty nice, because all I really did was say I love goofy shit, so that's awesome. No new review at the moment. There may be a new review later in the week if I go see a movie, which is always exciting, so stay tuned for that. But until then, we're just going to do something regular, something to fill the time here on the show, and we're going to do what I promised would happen more frequently, and since then I've done absolutely nothing since then. We are going to dive once again into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I've said this 1,000 times, but if you're new for this specific episode, we talk about the MCU a lot here on Spliced In Later, mainly because most of the time it's my favorite franchise thing in big blockbustery movie worlds, if you count it along like Star Wars and everything else. As I've said, I've loved the world building of the MCU. I like that it started with just a small little, here's an Iron Man movie. We allude to Nick Fury. And since then it has grown into what it has become, able to establish multiple franchises with multiple characters, but all have them in the same world where they can reference each other and play off each other's actions and motives, cross over into each other's movies, go off into their separate adventures, and it all, for the most part, works in a seamless narrative where if you've seen every little piece of the MCU, you get to enjoy it to the fullest. But if you're just watching one particular thing or another, you can enjoy it without feeling confused or flustered, mostly. This year for the MCU, everything's slowed down a little bit due to a lot of things, many conflicting factors, a bit of superhero fatigue, a bit of box office disasters, a bit of Jonathan Majors no longer being Kang, plenty of hiccups in the department, and probably for the best, and hopefully in the right direction, Kevin Feige and Disney and everyone behind Marvel have put the brakes on rolling out content after content after content. This year, 2024, there are no real new MCU films. There is Deadpool 3, which is a bit unique, but otherwise nothing. And apart from Echo that came out right at the start of the year, I don't actually know what TV shows will come out this year, if any, which is good. It allows for everybody to just take a breath and appreciate the MCU and not just get overwhelmed by it, and allows the people that are making it to go, okay, what are we doing wrong? What's working? What's not? How do we not really course correct, but just get back to quality over quantity? That is the important thing here. It's got to be more about making good separate products of things and not let's make 900 of them in a single sitting. Today, to continue our look for the years of the MCU, we're looking at Luke Cage, a TV show that premiered on Netflix as part of the bunch of Netflix shows that were part of the MCU that were all forming the Defenders. That came out, the first season came out in 2016, and then there was a second season in 2018 before it was unceremoniously cancelled in a big purge of Netflix Marvel content, which we'll talk about in a second. As I've said before, when I'm talking about all the past MCU stuff, I'm talking about everything. I know there's been a lot of, this isn't canon anymore, or this isn't that, or anything. I disagree with any of that. If something was made to be part of the MCU and was released as such, backtracking it later on means nothing to me. That's why we've talked about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Daredevil. It's all part of the world. Uniquely, though, as I say that, even now MCU is backflipping on its backflip, because I think in a desperate need just to make the new Daredevil show work, they've decided that it does exist in the old Daredevil universe, meaning that Daredevil show is canon in the MCU. It always was, but I guess it's officially canon again now. And by connection, that means all the other Netflix shows are canon. Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, and The Punisher. Does that mean we'll get more shows with them? Not sure. Does that mean that those characters will be played by those actors? Don't know. It'll be interesting to see what happens going forward. Really, it all depends on what the world looks like when the Daredevil Born Again show does actually premiere. So, as I record this, Is Luke Cage canon? Who knows? I'll just say it is because it is to me. So, Luke Cage, a Netflix show, lasted 2 seasons, starring Mike Coulter as Luke Cage, aka Carl Lucas, aka Power Man. It's a story set in Harlem, in New York City, and it follows Luke Cage, a man with indestructible skin who has some mysterious background past for how he got that power. But breaking it down very basically, he returns to Harlem after having some adventures with Jessica Jones, and essentially becomes the hero, striking out against organized crime and everything terrible going on in the suburbs, most notably against a notorious criminal kingpin called Cottonmouth, as well as his politically ambitious but probably even more terrifying sister Mariah Dillard, as well as a long-lost brother Diamondback. And then if you look into season 2, there's also Bushmaster, who comes along to cause trouble for Luke. And all the while, the show is basically a community show. It sort of shows how he connects with people in Harlem, the relationships he forms, the sense of responsibility he has to his town, and also how these criminal gangsters operate, how they backstab each other, how they operate and climb the ladders, and at different points in time, one gets more strong than the other, and one's notoriously taken off the board in a shock twist. And through it all, it's just also like a character study of what it means to Luke Cage to be the protector of Harlem. You know, what he feels he is owed, what he thinks he owes the city, etc., etc. Now, that might sound very simple and basic and not a lot to it. And on paper, sure. But I think it's because it's very hard to describe Luke Cage as a show, because it's all about style and identity and representation and just a real cool vibe that it's got going on in terms of music and dialogue and locations and real character development for these things, as well as it really focusing on just how great Michael Coulter is playing Luke Cage, and also the depth that they give these villains. The villains in Luke Cage are not mustache twirling, want to take over the world for evil purposes stuff. At least mostly. A majority of them fitting into the world of the Netflix Defender stuff are street level crime thugs that have very selfish personal desires that never range further from just revenge against a particular person, or being the king of organized crime, or just being a shithead. But like a street level shithead, somebody who's just an asshole to people, not somebody who wants to be an asshole to the entire world. Now, I don't know much about Luke Cage comics. You'll find I don't actually know a lot about Marvel comics in general. I'm aware of the characters. I've read some very famous comic arcs like Civil War and stuff like that. But honestly, a lot of the information I get from Marvel is if they appear in a show or a movie that I watch, I sort of learn by association with that who these characters are and their most famous stories and everything, because you watch YouTube vids and Wikipedia entries and all of that stuff. So it's hard for me to be like, oh yes, this is the perfect representation of Luke Cage from comic book to screen. I will say that I think it was difficult. It was probably difficult for Luke Cage in a way that it wasn't for Daredevil and Jessica Jones. Obviously, the approach with the Netflix Marvel shows was, I believe at the time, to take on famous Marvel characters that were limited in their powers and scope and try and get them into this world without forcing them to fight Thanos, essentially. More down-to-level, simple stories where it really does build on this world of the MCU. A lot of the time, if you don't have stuff like this, it's just superheroes smashing stuff, and you don't really get a sense of the lived-in world. It's kind of like the Monarch TV show that I mentioned in my Godzilla and Kong review. You can watch movie after movie of Godzilla and Kong flattening cities and have fun with that. But only a show like Monarch lets you get a sense of this world that they're flattening, the people who live in it, how they cope with monster attacks every other day, what they're doing to save themselves if Godzilla doesn't show up to stop the big spider monster rampaging downtown. So essentially, this is what the Netflix shows are. It's, yes, Iron Man's flying overhead on his way to take down Ultron, but meanwhile on the street, there's a sinister criminal who's taken over the streets and squeezing people for money and committing murders and getting away with it, who's going to stop them? And that's where Daredevil and Jessica Jones and Luke Cage and Iron Fist and all those people, the Punisher, all come into that. Daredevil and Jessica Jones, it's pretty easy because they are just, well, not generic, but they are white superheroes that have been written for 1,000 times over. For something like Luke Cage, I don't know what led to his creation in the comics. I've seen many different pictures of him in various different styles. I've seen him in stories that seem very serious and intense, and others where it's kind of a bit cartoony. I would say heavily influenced by blaxploitation style, Rudy Ray Moore, things like that. So what about those Luke Cage stories are you going to do putting onto a gritty, violent Netflix world that also doesn't offend, I guess? I mean, one of the hardest things I know was going into making Luke Cage was that he has his famous catchphrase, "Sweet Christmas," which is a silly catchphrase, and it doesn't really fit with the world that they live in. But they have to try and get Luke Cage to say that in some capacity without it being silly and it being respectful, I guess. And I think it works so well. I mean, up until this point, Netflix had 100% success rate for me. Daredevil Season 1, solid. Jessica Jones Season 1, perfect. Daredevil Season 2, not so much, but that was very clearly a reactionary, oh, Daredevil was really good, we have to quickly make a Season 2 without really thinking about it. It's the standard Iron Man 2 of the Netflix Defenders world, especially when they were like, we're going to do our Defenders miniseries, and now we're going to start planting the seeds for that. But going into Luke Cage continued to hold the bar really high just in terms of creating a show that fit in this world but was unique. You don't watch Luke Cage and Daredevil and feel like you're watching the same show just with a different lead character. Daredevil is a gritty superhero street level action adventure. Jessica Jones is a detective noir psychological devastation. And Luke Cage is a jazzy, vibrant, community-driven world building of essence. Full of great music. I mean, Method Man, I think, shows up in person to sing some songs in here. And what's really great about Luke Cage, I think, is how he presents himself to Harlem. Michael Coulter already proved he was great just as Luke Cage for his little few appearances in Jessica Jones. What was great in that they didn't overdo him. Luke Cage only showed up when he was necessary to Jessica's story, and then when he wasn't needed anymore, he was taken away and only came back when it was important. But those fleeting appearances was like, yes, this is a great character and a great actor playing him, and I want to see more of his adventures and where he's off to, where he's come from, what he's going to do next. Planting him in Harlem, like his community, his home, where he grew up, and showcasing how people live, how they interact with one another. It's a world that I have never been a part of and probably never will. It's fun. And it's interesting to get that sense that I never even considered was possible. So Mike Holder's great. He's got good comedic timing. He's got the seriousness when he needs to, and he's really imposing. He really leans into that, I have indestructible skin and nothing can stop me. Well. I don't think he's ever really he never says, I'm Power Man, because this is the serious Netflix real life world. But if someone were to call him Power Man, it would not be unwarranted. Now, a lot of his story in Luke Cage Season 1 is a sense of trying to find his place, what he's going to do to protect Harlem, while also keeping... Originally, he's like, I gotta keep my powers a secret and not draw attention to myself. But then once he does, he's motivated by a sense of revenge for a friend that dies, and a need to take down a particular nasty criminal. And then that criminal ends up being replaced by a long-lost family member who's also out for revenge against Luke Cage. So that becomes personal as well. And then as it all goes, essentially he becomes the hero of Harlem. Not the mascot, but the person that people turn to help them when they feel that everyone else has forgotten about them. The police, the government, all of that. None of them are helping, but Luke Cage is here to save the day. And it really leans into that front-facing community aspect of the show. Everybody knows Spider-Man is a superhero. They see him swinging around. They can go, hey, Spidey. But Luke Cage doesn't have an alias. He doesn't have a secret code name or a costume. Luke Cage is just strolling down the street and people will be like, Luke Cage, what's going on? And he's like, not much, you? And he knows people's names and he asks about their mothers and whether they went to school. And that really engrossing sense of community and this world inside Harlem really makes it such an engaging thing to watch. And you really like Luke as such a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve and is always there for people. It's pretty damn awesome. I don't really like how his story ended. Unfortunately, as with all the other Netflix shows, once Disney got the rights back to these characters or something, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but there was a sense that Netflix lost any rights to these characters. They all went back exclusively to Disney. I don't know if they waited for a moment to work out what they were going to do or if Disney shut the door on them completely, but the result of that was all these popular shows, Daredevil, Jessica, Luke, Iron Fist, Punisher, that all had some pretty good 1 or 2 seasons, suddenly unceremoniously were just like cancelled, no more. Luke Cage season 2 ends with him as a new criminal kingpin. It's an interesting road he takes to get there, one I'm not particularly keen on, but as with most Netflix shows, the season 2 always seems to be a lot weaker than season 1. For the most part, it was good, but just that point where he decides, I'm going to become the thing I was destroying, but I can do it better, is an odd place to take that character. If at least they'd gone on to a season 3, maybe they could have explained their motivators, but with Luke Cage being cancelled, the last thing you see of him is sitting in a criminal chair with subordinates who he used to be punching through walls, now coming in and being like, who do you want us to squeeze, boss? What do you want to do? It doesn't leave a good taste in my mouth just based on who he is as a character and a person. Luckily, with Luke Cage may or may not being part of the MCU again and being able to use these stories and these characters, maybe we'll get to see some more. Who knows? But that's just a minor gripe on an otherwise amazing character and an amazing world. Another thing that made Luke Cage so great was its villains. Netflix villains generally spot on. Kingpin, fantastic. Kilgrave, great. Luke Cage was interesting in that it had some really good villains, one particularly bad villain, and when it chose to focus on a particular villain, it was great. Its problem was it was always sort of shifting the focus on who was the main threat, and it didn't really handle that balancing out particularly well. For the first half of Luke Cage Season 1, the main threat is Cottonmouth, played by the incredible Mahershala Ali. Cottonmouth is sort of like the kingpin of Harlem of sorts. He's very, I rule the streets, pay me, how do you know what you do when you give allegiance to a king, you give tribute, that sort of thing. And he's got some real style as well. Mahershala Ali is fantastic playing him. And there's also depth to him in a way that wasn't with like Kilgrave or even Kingpin really. He's coming up from he's essentially inherited being a crime boss from his mother, and now he's the new one. But his frustration at Luke Cage just being ahead of him at every step and him being completely outclassed in terms of power as well makes for a really motivating and interesting character. Alongside him is his sister, Mariah. Mariah is running for politics. She wants to help Harlem through being a politician and cleaning up the streets and all of that. On paper, that seems like a good approach, but she's terrible about it because she'll use Cottonmouth's criminal empire to influence the way the public perceives her and to get her political power. Though she's adamant the whole time that she's not a criminal, she's not like Cottonmouth, she never will be. Up until a point where, not really spoilers, but Cottonmouth is removed from the board and suddenly Mariah begins a very interesting, long character arc development to becoming a criminal kingpin herself. Two great characters, great villains that sort of sabotage each other. Cottonmouth had to go so Mariah could evolve into the villain that she becomes. But Cottonmouth had barely started really impressing and showing us what that character could do before he was unceremoniously pushed aside. Both hold each other up, both push each other down. What's great about villains is when they're given time to evolve. as great as Kingpin and Kilgrave are for Daredevil and Jessica Jones, they're one seasons. They're limited to one season. Their arcs are finished, really. So when those second seasons came for those shows, there was really a sense of, what do we do? We've already done the best that we can with these particular villains. How do we top them? We can't really. We either have to go in a different direction or just accept that it's not going to be as the first one. Mariah is a 2-season villain. Her rise and fall and everything that goes on with her is stretched out over 2 seasons, along with her number one henchman, Shades, is also an interesting character. So that's a really good part that keeps you going for those 2 seasons. I don't know what they would have done for the 3rd season because their stories are mostly wrapped up by the end of season 2. But that's where they do it right, where they give these characters time to grow and they go, yes, Mariah's developing into a fascinating villain and she's still around, so we can use her for season 2. Cottonmouth, though, after 7 episodes, it's like we're really just seeing who he is. He's gone. And then replacing Cottonmouth, they brought in Diamondback, who is like Luke Cage's long-lost brother, and he's very cartoony comic book villain. He does not fit with the vibe that Luke Cage has established. He's nowhere near as charismatic or fun to watch as Cottonmouth, and he takes screen time from Mariah in a lot of places as well. So not only do you have some of the best villains in the Marvel Netflix world, you also have one of the worst. Season 2, it's been a long time since I've watched season 2. As I said, I think it was a really good up until what they finished Luke Cage's story with, but I think the Bushmaster villain character was very interesting. He had a lot of emotional depth and development, which was great. But again, he's sort of pushed aside to allow Mariah to become even more villainous when you kind of want to see what more they can do with Bushmaster. But overall, Luke Cage as a show is solid. It is really engrossing stuff. You really get a sense of loving Luke Cage as a character and wanting to see what adventures he goes on, and you really enjoy seeing him in Harlem and interact with people, as well as the way the show is shot and the vibe of the music and the jazz and everything like that. And it's got some really great villainous characters when done right. Unfortunately, its rewatchability is a bit difficult because of the unceremonious cancellation. It doesn't really feel like you're watching a complete story. It's just like a glimpse into this world. He did appear again in like the end of season 3 of Jessica for a little cameo, but really didn't get a sense that his story was complete. But overall, I mean, Luke Cage for me, when I rank the Netflix shows, it's number 3. It's in the top 3 easily. Daredevil, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage are all great. If I rank them, it goes Jessica Jones, Daredevil, Luke Cage. But really, they're 3 very different shows, and it really depends on what you're in the mood for that will dictate which one you're going to choose to watch, which one you enjoy more. Luke Cage gets an 8 out of 10 from me. Easy watch, good stuff. And I'm so excited at the prospect that Michael Coulter could come back at any point, say, "Sweet Christmas, Luke Cage is back again." There, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. The next time we check in on the Netflix world will be Iron Fist, which will be a completely different chat. Hot take, I don't hate it like everybody does, but I do agree it's a mess. I don't think we'll get there just yet. I think Doctor Strange is next. I'll have to check the notes to see what came next. But I hope you'll be able to join me for that and keep enjoying this very wild and all over the place look into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Until next time, I love and appreciate you as always. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.